because often people can keep on joining us as we go through the session. So first off, welcome and thank you for being here today. This is our next MeasureUp webinar called Beyond Carbon, Practical Environmental and Wellbeing Valuation. And we're really pleased to be here with you today and to be talking about this topic, because it's certainly one that numerous of us are interested. Apologies. I meant to shut down every single item on my desktop before kicking off today, but there we go. One just flicked up onto the screen for everybody. So before we go into this quite detailed topic, I just wanted to bring us outwards a little bit and recognise the context that we're all living in right now. So we do this sustainability / social value / impact practice, and it can get quite down into the detail and looking at metrics and which standard to report against and what's the right thing for us to do to meet these requirements. But that's all within the context of the world that we're living in, which is unfortunately is continuing to be extremely volatile and uncertain, and with extreme attacks on our human rights and people's right to life, as well as continuing environmental disasters. So for me, and I'm sure for many social value and impact practitioners out there, it can sometimes feel like, oh gosh, what's the point? What's the point of these different metrics that we're trying to gather? And that made me think that actually I wanted to kick off this session with looking at the point and the purpose of social value practice, certainly as I know it, and that is to address and tackle inequality and to increase and improve our care and connection to the environment, and to improve and focus on all of our well-being. That's the point, and that's the purpose, and that's why the social value movement for so many years has looked at changing the way the world accounts for value, so that we can account for the things that actually matter to all of us and make resource allocation decisions based on that, the things that we value and that are valuable to us for now and for future generations, not a limited view of value primarily around the financial number, which allows us to claim success whilst environmental and human destruction continues. So that's our big context, and now we can move into more detailed metrics and the purpose and point of why we're all here, and allowing us to do our quiet revolution as social value geeks and nerds who get into the detail, because we need to change the structures so that we can improve our lives and our environment now and for everyone in our future. So no small task there. So to be able to talk about what we're actually going to cover today, I'll give a quick intro to our goal and the things that we hope to share during this session. A quick introduction to what well-being is, and specifically our focus on the dimension of the environment. And a bit of an intro to MeasureUp for those who are new to it, as well as looking at, well, what's new in MeasureUp and sort of what are we showing to you today. And then we're going to look at, well, how do we do these things around measuring and understanding and valuing our impact on the environment and the environment's impact on us and our well-being. And I'm very delighted to be able to pass over to our wonderful colleague here, Alan Little, who is an expert in this area through government work and through lots and lots of the work that he does today through his many avenues and many hats, and as our representative from one of our partners, State of Life, and one of the co-founders of MeasureUp, along with Impact Reporting, who I'm representing, I suppose, as one of our the other co-founders of MeasureUp. I'll do a shout out to our third partner of PRD, who isn't represented by one of our speakers today, but is certainly represented in the work that we're doing. Then we'll give you a little walkthrough of a bit more detail on the actual values changes and the resources that you'll find in the environmental set that we've got in the MeasureUp framework itself, and then we'll have a chance of Q&A and some next steps too. So just a bit of housekeeping. We are recording this session, and that will be released out to everybody who's registered. We also do house the webinar recordings on the website, so people can catch up on past ones as well as seeing this one again if you really like what we say. We have the chat open, which is a wonderful chaos when there's over 100 people on the call, but we warmly invite you to ask questions either in the Q&A or raise points and talk to one another in the chat. We love to hear who's here and where you're from and what, any questions that you've got around this topic, as well as what your favourite cake type is, which you will have seen in the polls. There is a point to that, which we will get to later. I should say my name's Catherine Manning. I'm the Programme Director of MeasureUp, as well as Head of Impact Practice at Impact Reporting and a board member for Social Value International. So that's what we're covering, and our aims for today is that we want to familiarise ourselves and one another with the different ways to measure and value our impact on the environment. And yes, Neil is here for the cake. Unfortunately, we can't hand out actual cake, so we'll have to share a virtual cake instead. And we're looking at not just carbon, right? We're looking at the broader understanding, like what's broader impacts that we have on the environment. We're going to look at getting practical. So how do we actually do this in practice within our own work? And one of the points of this session is to give you an overview of where we're at in terms of measurements, developments in MeasureUp around this area. So that's our aims for our session today. So to get going, what are we talking about? We are talking about MeasureUp and environmental impact in relation to social value. So primarily and first and foremost, MeasureUp was developed in line with and in response to a growing understanding of what social value is and its importance to us in our societies and in our communities and in our organisational decision making. Increasingly, there is convergence on the definition of social value, primarily understanding this to be about impact on our overall well-being. Now, for MeasureUp, we primarily, or first and foremost, look to the UK Government Green Book and the definitions in there and the guidance in there to guide what we're doing and what we're responding to with MeasureUp. Said I'm on the board of Social Value International, so certainly another that guides me as a practitioner, but also informs our work, is the Social Value International definition, which it highlights the importance to individuals or to stakeholders and the value that they place on these changes and impacts on our well-being. And I do think it's important to look at other standards that are out there that should be important to us. Right, we're in the UK. The British Standards Institute also has the definition of social value as being the generation of personal and collective well-being over the short and long term. So another big term that we could spend absolutely ages discussing, because there's lots and lots of different definitions of it out there, is well-being itself. So for us within the MeasureUp team and the MeasureUp resource, we primarily refer to the definitions as outlined through the UK government resources and such bodies as the HM Treasury and the Office of National Statistics. So they talk about well-being as being about how people feel and areas of our lives that are most important for personal, community and national well-being. But importantly for this discussion today, the Office of National Statistics, or the What Works Wellbeing Centre as was, talk about all of those things, but also highlight that this includes the environmental factors that affect us, how we function in society, and the subjective experiences that we have. So MeasureUp has been created within this context. And so what is it? MeasureUp is a measurement and valuation framework that aims to offer a credible and progressive resource for those that want to measure and value aspects of well-being, whether they be social or environmental, and who want to take a stakeholder focused approach to that. We have made it open. We want to support people to be able to use this resource. We've made it transparent because we think transparency is really, really important for us to understand what we're talking about and to get better at this practice collectively. We're aiming for this to be practical. I like the website, it's nice and colourful, but we actually need people to use it for it to be a useful resource that influences our practice. And we are looking for this to be sustainable and progressive. We want to work in collaboration with other people working in this space, and we want to support people towards progressive practice. So what's actually in the resource itself? So firstly, you'll find a set of values. Now, what are these? They are specific, approximate or proxy values that are associated with a set of defined activities, so things that we do, or outcomes, things that change for us around those things that we've already highlighted or talked about in relation to well-being. So a change in our state, our beliefs, our feelings or emotions, those sorts of things. And all of those values are associated with one of the 10 dimensions of well-being. So there's lots of mappings or sort of categorizations of dimensions of well-being out there. The one that we primarily aligned with is the 10 dimensions of well-being as defined by the UK National Wellbeing Dashboard. This is primarily or kicked off as a UK resource. The sources and the research that we're using are UK-based resources and data sources. So it seems like a good place for us to start to say, right, well, we're going to align to our national mapping or categorization of the dimensions of well-being based on data that's mostly about us, or about a lot of us anyway. So what else we'll find in there is a combination of different value types. So there's some values that relate to or represent economic value, so change in economic value either for us or the economy overall. Might be fiscal values in there, so costs or benefits related to the state, or the fiscal budgets, these sorts of things. There's well-being values in there, so changes in aspects of our well-being and the value that's associated with that. And then there's environmental well-being, so the bit that we're mostly going to be focusing on today. The other thing that you'll find in MeasureUp is the measurement side, right? So nice set of values associated with activities and outcomes. Very nice. What do I do with them? And so what we'll have is the other side of that, of the how to use and how to put this into practice in your social value / impact / sustainability practice. And we have these progressive levels of measurement. So we've got bronze, which is basic calculations or estimations for primarily useful for planning and estimating our current social value or our potential social value in the future. The silver level looks at progressing us on to understanding differences for different groups of people or different bits of our activities. So what can we find out that gives us more information that may allow us to get more specific or and better estimate our value. It's still estimating though, and so we've got the gold level where we're actually looking for evidence, and primarily, if this is related to change for people, we're looking at how do we gather evidence from people themselves about the changes that they're experiencing and use that information to be able to calculate our value. For environmental value, that would be actual results or actual data or evidence of the environmental change that we're having or making, and being able to use that to calculate our environmental value. We've got a gold plus level, which is where we most formally deal with, is all of this value attributable to us, to our activities? Now, this is at that top level of our measurement scale, because quite a lot of that's a bit hard, and we want to make this easy and accessible for people to be able to have a go. However, I do want to highlight that we do encourage people to think about that attribution or dead weight question or point at these more these easier or less complex levels of measurement as well. So we are working on having a more formal and embedded bronze plus and silver plus to help to guide people through estimating that attribution or that dead weight at those lower levels as well. So for today, out of our wellbeing dimensions, we are focusing on environmental well-being or environmental value. So according to the National Wellbeing Dashboard, this dimension relates to the natural environment, which is relevant to people's quality of life because it makes human life and activity possible. Measures or values associated with this particular topic may cover aspects of climate change, the natural environment and natural capital, and the effects that this has the effects of human activity on the environment, and vice versa, the environment on human activity. In a lot of practice that I'm sure we do and that we see out there, environment and social can end up in silos from one another. We kind of addressed this already in that circle of different aspects of well-being or dimensions of well-being, that these things aren't separate. And I suppose if we sit and think for a minute, then we would recognise that, we're not disconnected from the environment within which we live. We are animals as much as any other animal is. We're a part of nature. It is difficult to recognise that within measurement and valuation and accounting practice, though, because you've got to define some things to actually measure and value. However, we want to be able to work on and recognise that there is that connection and interconnection between the environment, people and well-being. So one representation of that I certainly agree with and look to is the Sustainable Development Goals wedding cake representation, right? And it shows the different Sustainable Development Goals that and how they actually interact with one another and how they impact on one another and are dependent upon one another. So we are dependent upon the environment or the biosphere they talk about here. So our societies can only act within our environment, and our economy is actually reliant on society and the environment as well. Within the Government Green Book, there's lots of examples of how the environment both can lead to well-being costs for us as well as well-being benefits. And I'd encourage people to have a look at that because they've got good examples of that in relation to different programme types that we might be putting into place. So the examples on the screen in infrastructure or land use and forestry, urban planning, manufacturing or security, lots and lots of ways that our human activity is dependent upon, but also has an impact on the environment around us. So within this, that's what we're talking about. What's that got to do with where we're at in MeasureUp? Before we go into the changes that we've been working on in MeasureUp, we would love to hear a little bit from yourselves about what you're doing in your own practice. So we've got 2 questions here where we'd love to hear from you, and I believe there's a poll. Oh yes, there's a poll that's popped up. I've separated these out into what are you measuring in relation to your own environmental impact at this point in time? And then we're going to have a second question that's looking at what areas are you actually valuing, or any of you doing any valuation practice in relation to this area of practice as well. Now, I'm not in charge of the polls myself, so I'm not totally sure how these show up. Neil, I might need to bring you into the conversation to help me in sharing some of the results, or making sure people can see those.
I think in the chat, Catherine, you can see. I hope. Yes, there we go. Carbon is 32%, waste is 24%, water is 17%, habitat biodiversity is at 11%, and then air quality is 7%, and then none yet is 6%.
Wonderful, lovely. Yeah, and it seems a similar sort of spread.
Yeah.
For the valuation part as well, which is great to see and useful for us, right? I know it's a very quick sort of finger in the air or thumb in the air sort of sense check of where we're at and what we're working on, but yeah, you know, it's good to be able to see what it is that we're working on, and actually helpful for me because some of these things, few, are things that we've been working on in the set, so I'm quite pleased about that. So moving on to the progress that we've been making. So when we first launched MeasureUp, we launched our MVP, or minimum viable product. Can't say those words. And that included our sort of starter set or initial proof of concept of the environmental values that we published, which was literally these 5 that are on the screen here. By springtime of this year, we'd been scratching our heads and looking at these and saying, well, that doesn't cover a wide scope, let's say. So we did a full review of what we've got in place and what we should or could have that would actually help people with a more broad range of environmental measurement and valuation. And we developed a development plan which aimed to cover the available environmental values based on the best resources that we've got available at this point in time. So resources metrics. We're also looking at well, I've said before about aligning with the government green book and supporting people around, well, the type of reporting that they might want to do. So we've been using the framing of the scopes of the greenhouse gas protocol. And we wanted to be able to work on clarification of of how to measure and what these actual values represent, because you see a value associated with a bit of environmental impact and it could be interpreted as, oh, a ton of carbon is worth about this much, so I've produced loads of tons of carbon and I've created loads of value. It's like, yes, this is definitely the wrong way round, so we need to make sure that we're clear about when things are a cost or a benefit or a disbenefit versus a benefit. And also we wanted to be a bit clearer on how the different values link together in the set, particularly as we're increasing the number that are in there. So what have we actually been working on? So we defined 4 subcategories under the environment dimension. The first around measuring greenhouse gas emissions, the second around waste management, the next around habitat conservation, and then pollution control. And we've been working on developing in line with that plan. So we have published earlier in the summer, a set of values that we've kind of classified under the main things or normal things people would be counting in relation to Scope 3 reporting. We've just published at the end of last week the next set or batch under the Scope 1 set of value types of things that people would be measuring and evaluate in relation to greenhouse gas emissions. And we've been working on this set that's in relation to waste management. You can see from our coming soon stamps that the next things that will be coming up. And we'll look at a few of those in a bit more detail in a little bit later on in the session. But first, how? If we're going to measure and value any of those things that would fit under those subcategories, how would we go about that? How do we measure and value these different environmental factors? If we should and if we want to. And I'm absolutely delighted to be able to pass this extremely challenging question over to our wonderful guest speaker, Alan Little, who's going to walk us through an overview of some pretty complex stuff that he's done a wonderful job of making accessible for us all. So Alan, I'll pass to you.
Hi everyone, thank you, Catherine. That's great.
Alan, you just need to go off mute.
Hi everyone. Can you hear me now? Great. I'm just going to see if I can move these slides as well. There we go. Good. We're here. Okay, everyone. Thank you, Catherine, for that introduction. We're going to get straight into it, but I've got a quick confession before you. Okay, I'm pretty clumsy these days. I'm going to blame that on being a parent of a toddler, which means I'm knackered most of the time. Okay, and this weekend I was woken up at about 5 a.m, headed downstairs for my first morning brew, which was needed, headed back upstairs with it and spilt most of it on the carpet. I do this kind of thing all the time. Okay, now what's the cost of this? Let me see if I can move these slides on. Apologies everyone. There we go. What's the cost? So I have to buy carpet cleaner. This is the damage cost I'm paying to fix the problem that I've caused. What I could do instead is buy a spill-proof mug. That would be what we call abatement costs. So it's paying to prevent the problem in the first place. And then there's my long-suffering partner who's understandably annoyed about stepping in coffee spills all the time, puts her in a foul mood for the rest of the day. That's a well-being impact. Okay, we have just covered as much environmental economics as you probably need today. There are 3 core ways to value environmental impacts. So damage cost, fix the mess. We use that to value things like air quality and flood prevention. The abatement cost approach, avoiding the mess in the first place, that's actually the approach that we use for carbon. Sometimes can be a bit confusing. People think we're valuing the damage when we put a value on a ton of CO2 equivalent emissions, but we're actually using abatement. It's saying if my project emits more carbon, somewhere else in the economy, someone else is going to have to reduce their carbon so that we can stay within our targets towards net zero. And the wellbeing impact is increasingly being used, and we'll look at a few examples of this, but that might include noise pollution in and around an airport, for example, or loss of amenity. So if we're going to lose some outdoor recreation space, school playing fields, something like that, we would usually use a kind of wellbeing approach. Okay. So today we're going to look at how we can apply these in a kind of credible, proportionate, and hopefully genuinely useful way. Okay. Right. Before we think about MeasureUp, so MeasureUp, as Catherine said, it's proxy values. These are really useful to apply to the outcomes of our projects. But that's icing the cake. We first need to bake the cake. So that means understanding and describing what our environmental impacts are. Where we can, we need to quantify those impacts. And then then and only then do we think about valuation. So valuation is at the end of a process that we need to go through. And just to stretch the metaphor slightly, if I can go back, not all cakes need icing. Okay, it's not always appropriate or necessary or useful to kind of monetize those impacts. I've worked on some mega projects worth tens of billions of pounds where we might look at a range of different impacts, but only one or two, at best a handful, are actually valued. So you're in good company if you're not like over icing your cake and ending up with Colin the Caterpillar on the right rather than the M&S version on the left. And if anyone does watch Bake Off, I think the best part of it is the spin-off show on a Friday with Joe Brand, where people send in their photos of bacon disasters. And this is one of them, but they're absolutely hilarious. So if you are thinking, right, we don't have the necessary support, the capability in our organization, if we try and value this, it's probably going to go wrong, then it's fine, kind of leave it on ice. Right. Let's move on to kind of get started properly. Catherine mentioned this thing called the Green Book. So this is the foundation really for me of like all good social value analysis. The principles overlap with Social Value International, Social Value UK. So it's a good starting point, I think, for most social value work that we do. It has several supplementaries to the core Green Book. The main one that I want to kind of highlight today is the Enabling Natural Capital Approach, ENCA for short. Okay, so this is published by DEFRA and it's integrated into the core Green Book as well. And just to do some myth busting around the Green Book itself, that is not just for government and it's not just for economists and analysts. It's for anyone working in a public organisation that wants to understand their environmental impacts. And it's also for private practitioners, especially those that are bidding for public funding or are on board as consultants to support those bids. So it's really for everyone. And at a certain level, it is quite accessible. And I think, you know, I worked as part of the Natural Capital Group for DEFRA that designed this guidance. There are parts of that framework that I think you can definitely use without getting too technical about it. The other thing to point out about ENCA is it's not just a PDF, dry PDF guidance, it's a resource. So there's evidence banks, there are recommended values, there are toolkits, there are case studies, all on the ENCA website. Okay. I'm going to focus on the main part of that framework today, just to kind of get started. It starts with one simple question, but a really good one to ask. It then has a triage process, which again, you can definitely do. And then there's the assessment process itself. Okay, so let's have a look at the first question that the Green Book encourages to think about. So even before you've designed your project, you have a problem that you're trying to solve. And the Green Book encourages to think, could nature actually be part of the solution to that problem? So I'm not going to go through all of these on the slide, but this is the full breadth of what's available in ENCA, where they have some guidance on how nature could be a solution. So if your problem more fundamentally is children's mental health in your community, or we've got a problem with levels of physical activity amongst older people, then you have natural assets that you could use to help solve those problems. So it's encouraging us to think that way. So I think that's a really good starting point. After we've done that, and then we're starting to think, okay, we've got a project. We know our kind of preferred way forward with this. We can then go to the screening tool. And I think these 6 questions are fabulous to take us beyond carbon. Okay, so if you are focused, you know, just kind of jumping straight to carbon, but you want to think about, okay, well, I want to think about the environment more broadly, this is a great way to start. So there are 6 questions, and all it requires of us is to answer these yes, no, or maybe. That's all you need to do as a starting point. Now, you could do that in a fairly rigorous way. You could bring in environmental specialists, or you could just use a little bit of common sense for kind of lower cost projects to start to answer these. So it's, you know, will it affect management of land? Will it affect the atmosphere? And there's a breakdown of, air quality, greenhouse gases within that. Will it affect a water body? Will it affect wildlife? That's a kind of prompt around biodiversity more broadly, natural raw materials, and finally kind of outdoor recreation. So these are the areas that we're thinking of. So how I used to use this screening tool in government, for example, I used to work at the Department for Education. We had large business cases, but we're working in the education sector. It's not environment specific. We might have business cases coming through, say, to change the math curriculum. Okay, so we're going to change what we teach. We could quite quickly use the screening tool to say it's probably a no to all of these things on that business case, but at least we've thought about it. We've been systematic. If it was a schools capital funding case to Treasury, most of these, if not all of them, are going to be ticked yes. And that is prompting us to think about what in our analysis do we need to do. If it was, as we did, kind of school playing fields, or another one that comes to mind is the provision of free sanitary products in secondary schools. It was a partial assessment. It's like, yeah, there are 2 or 3 of these that we want to focus on, but not all of them. Okay. So it provides 2 legitimate outcomes. Either you can identify the relevant impacts that you want to move forward with in your assessment, or you can systematically explain why you're not carrying forward everything. Okay, that's screening. Once you've done the screening, sorry, skipped ahead a little bit there. We get to the 4-step approach. So this is the anchor approach to doing that assessment. I won't go through all of this today, but it starts with, okay, we want to do an assessment. The first thing to do is to map that out. Okay, understand the environmental context. What habitats are we working with? There's kind of 8 different habitats there that Green Book encourages to think about. Can we do some baselining? Can we think about how localized our impacts are, or is this more spread when we think about supply chains? Step 2, assess the effects on the natural assets themselves. So it's a capitals approach. So it's saying there is a stock of capital, environmental capital, as you might with physical capital, like buildings, and there is a flow of benefits and costs that comes from that. So the second stage is about the effects on the stock. The third step is about the effects on the flow of benefits, and this is where your welfare, your well-being, your social value comes in. So that's quantifying those effects and where you can valuing them. So that's under step 3. And then finally, that is going to be uncertain, and there are going to be some risks around this. Our project might lead to a slightly higher level of flooding risk, for example. So how are you going to manage and mitigate that? That's step 4. Okay, that's the 4-step assessment, and it's still proportionate. It's kind of doing that in a proportionate way, depending on the project that you're working with. Let's get on to valuation next. So you've been through that process, and within step 3, you're going to think about what you can value. So these are some of the things that are in the Green Book that you can place values on. And back to the starter, you'll see that some of those are damage costs, like on air pollution, NOx and PM 2.5, so particulate matter. You'll see that some of it is welfare or well-being based, so the physical health benefits from nature. There's a range of different benefits that you might get from that. Local amenity, visual amenity, these are all welfare effects. You get down to flood damage, that's more based on property damage. And then towards the bottom, greenhouse gas emissions, that's abatement. So you've got a whole range of different approaches summarized in these values, but there are a range around them. Okay, so that's kind of going beyond the carbon in terms of what we can place a value on. But appreciate carbon is a key one to think about. And from the poll, a lot of you will be focused on that. So let's just hone in a little bit. How do we value carbon? Well, again, we have another 4-step process, slightly different one here. So this is the one that Department for Transport, but also Department for Energy recommend. So it starts with scoping. And what's encouraged here, where you can, is to think about whole life carbon assessment. So one thing that I guess a lot of you, when you're thinking about carbon, will be doing is looking at scopes. So 1, 2, 3. That's really useful to kind of for reporting, and it gives you a breakdown of where your emissions are coming from. But the other thing that's useful is to think about the time dimension. Okay, think about your project as a life cycle. And that's going to have within it capital carbons, particularly during the construction phase. There's lots of embodied carbon in those construction materials and the haulage and freight to get there. That's capital carbon. You then got operating carbon. Your project's up and running, but you need to maintain it. You need to keep the lights on. That's operating. And then the use of that is the user carbon. For example, if this was rail infrastructure, it's the use of rail and the mode shift from road to rail and the kind of net effect of that on your carbon emissions. So 3 different areas, whole life assessment, but do it proportionally and just scope out where you think most of the carbon is coming from, and you can focus on that and maybe not other areas. And then Catherine will come on to this, so I won't dwell on it, but essentially the example we're going to show for MeasureUp is you can quantify some effects in terms of outputs, things like raw materials or fuels. You can then convert that to CO2 equivalent emissions, and then you can value it. So that's the other steps. Catherine will talk through an example of that. All I wanted really to say on the carbon values that are in MeasureUp is that they rightly, within the MeasureUp website, we say, look, here's a snapshot for a particular year that your emissions might fall into. But if you're looking at that over time, let's say your emissions are in 2050, the value is going to be 50% higher. And that's because, again, the approach we're taking here is abatement cost. How much does it cost to reduce carbon? The closer we get to our target, the harder it is for society to offset a ton of emissions. We're using all the cheap ideas that we have, like insulating homes, relatively cheap. We're getting into things like carbon capture and storage, relatively expensive. There's a sliding scale, and we're eating more and more into those expensive options, so the values rise with that. And the other thing to note here is that there is a range in the government series, so it's plus or minus 50%, and that's reflecting uncertainty around what that cost may be. So if you can use these other low-high scenarios as well as the central. And a final note on how not to value carbon, because I've seen this done so many times and I tear my hair out slightly, is to value carbon based on the permit prices. So we have something called the UK Emissions Trading Scheme. I won't go into that too much, but it's a cap and trade scheme. We cap emissions for certain industries. We allocate permits. They can trade them. If you emit less, you can trade your permit. Someone else who wants to emit more can buy it. And the cost of permits is £50. Now, if you value carbon in that way, that is much lower than the government's recommended value. So again, I've seen this used a lot, so please don't use it that way. But if you do have emissions within the trade sector that you can identify, you can actually adjust your carbon value down because it's considered to be a double count. I can go into the analysis behind that, but I think I'll kind of spare you that. It was just a kind of quick note on permit prices. So I'll finish with some takeaways, and then I'll hand back over. So bake the cake before you ice it. It's really important. Values are at the end of the process, not the start. Everyone, I think, could and should be asking the question, is nature part of our solution with our project? And I think everyone could use that screening tool quite simply. Monetization is not always important. So think about, why are we monetizing? Is this decisive? If you are expanding airport capacity in the UK, you're building the business case for that. Carbon is central to the decision-making process. So you absolutely need to value it. There are other things where you don't. So think about whether it's actually going to change a decision or be useful, or is it just a tick box? Avoid cherry picking. So if you've got a project that's, building a new building, and you're then focusing on the carbon benefits of the office going paperless, that's a very small part of the overall project. It's cherry picking a benefit when actually most environmental impacts are really about costs, identifying costs. Check for overlaps if you're double counting any impacts, and be as transparent as you can about recording the sources, the reliability of the evidence. MeasureUp really helps with that. We've talked about the grading, the awards. Use that and be really transparent, because it's fine for your evidence to be, uncertain. It really is. Okay, I'm going to stop there. Hand back over to Catherine, but thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Alan. Yeah, that's a huge amount of information, but it's told in such a way that, you know, I was very much looking forward to being able to learn from you around how to do this and how to do this properly and well and in an integrated way to with social and and well-being related measures and values as well. So thank you very much for that. So we're going to have a little bit of a deeper look at what this actually looks like in MeasureUp itself, and I am going to again pass this wonderful detailed question on to one of our esteemed colleagues within the MeasureUp team. So Kubra Hoke is our senior economist at Impact Reporting and working on the MeasureUp resource. So Kubra, can I ask you to step up to the screen? Hi there. Now, I'm happy to be your assistant in this. So I'll press the buttons and move you on to the next slide if you're happy with that. But yes, if you'd like to give us a walk through the updates in the MeasureUp set.
Thank you, Catherine. As you said, we developed MeasureUp environmental values a lot over the past 6 months. So as you shown before, we had 4 categories under the environmental values. One of them is the greenhouse gas emissions. So in July, we published a master value to measuring greenhouse gas emissions. And these values are based on the UK carbon GHG conversion factors and DESNE's carbon values that Alan mentioned. And under the master value, we had 10 scope 3 activities, including business travel, material use, waste disposal, hotel stay. So, and all these values are including the guidance how to report carbon emissions based on these activities and align with the Green Book and GHG protocol. You can go to the next slide. So recently we published newest values on greenhouse gas emissions related to scope 1 values. We had 4 different activities in scope 1 emissions. These emissions are related to the direct emissions resulting from the organization's activities like using fuels, using bioenergy, refrigerants or gases that results from the organization's production or running company passenger vehicles. So in MeasureUp, we provide a monetized environmental value for each of these activities. It can be used as a proxy to calculate the overall activity of an organization. Like for example, for an average sized petrol car, the monetized proxy value is 0.041 pound per kilometer. So if you want to record the monetized value of an organization's travel for a year, like for example, if it is 20,000 kilometers for a year, you can multiply this proxy with the kilometer. You can find the monetized value for the emissions or resulting from the passenger vehicles. So here it is important to remember that these are not positive values. You cannot add them into your social value. You should represent these as a cost or these benefits resulting from the activity of the organization. Go to the next slide. And the other category is the waste management category. So in here we have the previously we only have the waste diversion from landfill. So now in September we add 4 other kind of waste management activities like anaerobic digestion, composting, energy from waste, or recycling. So in MeasureUp, you can find a proxy value for each of these waste management activities. And you can use this proxy value to calculate the monetized value of your carbon savings or carbon emissions resulting from waste management activities. Like, for example, the monetized environmental value of carbon savings per ton of waste diverted by recycling is £166. So if you approximately say is it 100 ton waste is diverted by recycling over a year, so you can record it as a £16,600 as a monetized value of the carbon savings from recycling. So here it is important to recall that in GHG emission values, you are recording carbon emissions as a footprint, but in waste management values, these are not footprints, they are not carbon emissions, they are the carbon savings or additional carbon emissions resulting from your waste management activities. And next slide. So coming next, as Catherine mentioned, we had other values like GHG emission scope 2 values, the pollution values like including air pollution, water quality, soil erosion. I believe these also include the well-being values resulting from environmental activities, and also habitat conservation, including biodiversity and restoring eroded peatlands. And I believe we will extend this list more because this area is a developing area, and every day there's new updates coming. So we try to be up to date in terms of environmental values. And also we need help with positive environmental actions, like because most of these activities are negative impacts, like measuring carbon emissions or like the impacts of air pollution. So we need to measure some of the positive environmental actions like planting trees, etc. So if you have any research or any proxy value, you can contact with us. Yeah, that's it, I think.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Kubra. And yeah, I'll echo that point at the end that we have had it raised with us that yes, that these are in the main when we're talking about positive but when we're talking about environmental valuation or measurement, in the main, we're talking about costs, as Alan and Kubra have both highlighted. But there are people who are working on restoring nature or biodiversity or all sorts of different habitat conservation type activities, and we'd love to be able to better represent those within the sectors, as well as sort of support people in highlighting the good work that they're doing, as well as supporting us all in mitigating for the environmental costs that we have through our work. So yeah, we'll just reiterate our overall key takeaways. Do bake your cake, then decide whether or not to actually ice it. Scope your impacts first, then select your measurement methods and whether and how to value those. And I would echo that through all of the value set that is in MeasureUp, not just the not just the environmental values. Be informed by your audience and who you're reporting to. So what's the level that's proportionate and necessary for the decision that you're actually trying to inform? And it's fine not to monetize everything. It's fine not to measure everything as well. We can end up getting stuck in this, oh gosh, it's not perfect and it's not 100% accurate. You know, let's have a go and measure what we can that's proportionate to the resources that we've got available, the decision that we're trying to make, and in the way that's going to be most useful for us at that point in time, and be transparent about the fact that that's what we're doing and it's good enough for the use case that we've got. And think about beyond carbon. How is it that we're actually impacting on the environment, and how are we dependent upon it too? Just to highlight what we've got coming up next, we have another webinar that's looking at beyond the scorecard this time, and looking at winning social value bids, and how some people have been using MeasureUp practically in their in that area of their work. So that's coming up on the 25th of September. We have, so I should say, please do sign up for that. So you might hopefully you've seen lots of the sign up invites to that, and we'll share a link to that in the follow-up resources. We have some more what next, or things that are coming up in terms of where we're going with our MeasureUp work. So like Kubra's outlined the direction that we're going in terms of the next environmental values. Just a little snapshot on some of the other ones that we're focusing on at the moment. We're looking at traineeships. So is there some valuation that we could do around that? We're looking into children's well-being. That's an area that lots of people have been raising, to ask, well, what's out there and what could or should we be doing in relation to this? And we're looking at things around homelessness and the moving through different levels of secure or insecure to secure housing and accommodation. We've been looking at the use of MeasureUp, and we're working on a couple of different options around a MeasureUp estimator to try and make this different ways of making this resource user friendly for people and supporting people to have a go. So look out for that, or reach out if that's something that you're interested in. We're looking at continuing to work on our framework adoption resources. So we've got numerous different case studies that we're gathering together. And we'll be publishing. We're looking at how is this most useful for smaller organisations, so like SMEs, either individually or as part of larger organisations, supply chains, and VCSE organisations. And we're looking at improved measurement options. So how can we make the measures, the suggested or guided measures related to each of the values, more accessible or useful for different use cases? How many times can I say use in one sentence? Like Kubra's highlighted, we're really open to collaborating with people on developing the value set. So if you want to build with us, please do reach out. Check out our ideal value set, which is published on the website as well, which shows the long list of all of the ideas that we've got in the plan at the moment, where we're continuing to develop towards. So have a look in there and see if there's anything that's of interest. Most importantly, have a go. Have a go at this, and help us to all collectively, as a part of this social value growing industry and sector, to get better at this practice. The only way that we're going to do that and continue to improve and build a world where we account for the broadest sense of value, the things that really matter to us, is we all have a go and start doing it together. So please do that. If you need extra help, all of our partners are wonderful. I know I'm sitting a bit biased there because I work in one of them and with our wonderful other partners, but you know, we're great people and great resources and very skilled people in all three organisations. So do reach out to us, and we're really happy to chat and support wherever we can. I'd say thank you and questions, but we're right on time, aren't we? I haven't, I've been so scared of touching any of the controls at the top in case I stole control back off Alan and others who were doing the presenting. So I haven't been able to see the questions or the comments in the chat to the level that I would normally like to, but
there are no questions, Catherine, at the moment.
Great. All right,
so
then.
I think this is a good way we can finish it. But as always, they can email us at hello@measureUp.org.
Wonderful, wonderful. Oh, well, that's great. Phew, it's a good job that we talked through the whole hour then. But yes, if do reach out to us if you've got questions that you want to ask post session, please do reach out. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope it's been interesting and useful for you all. And thank you very much, and have a wonderful rest of your days.